Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. I hope you guys are having a fantastically awesome day so far. My day is going pretty good because I am feeling back to myself. The new medication I'm on for all my aches and pains, and that seems to finally be doing its job, and my body seems to be used to it, and I woke up this morning feeling freaking awesome for the first time in a long time. So I am so thankful today, and I'm back with you guys, which makes me even happier. So yeah, anyway, today we are reacting to the origins of American gun culture. This was a recommendation sent in to me by Keith. Keith, thank you so much for the email, mate. I really do appreciate it. As do I appreciate all the emails you guys send me. I know I haven't replied to any this week, but I will be getting to that on Saturday morning. As usual, guys, if you haven't done so already, please make sure you hit the subscribe button. And if you're feeling extra frisky, you may as well give the video a like as well. I do have a Buy Me a Coffee page and a Patreon page linked down in the description if you'd like to help support the channel. That'd be freaking awesome, but please feel no obligation to do so. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's check out the origins of American gun culture.
If you look at all the maps of the Spanish Empire you can find, you will notice that the Spaniards claimed far more land than they actually had, claims that were sometimes outright ridiculous, costly, and completely unenforceable. However, in North America, not only did they claim more than they actually had, but being that they were the first to colonize the American continents, one has to wonder why.
Sorry, I know I should be listening, and I am, but imagine having to cruise around wearing that stuff all day in the heat and I couldn't imagine it.
But being that they were the first to colonize the American continents, one has to wonder why they failed at enforcing all their claims. Claims that stretched from Alabama to Minnesota to Alaska and even to Hawaii.
I didn't know any of this.
Over a total of what are today 27 US states. Guns and property is the short answer. The Spanish came to the New World to conquer existing societies, build new societies, and mold it all into their global empire. Unlike the Dutch, British, and French, who mainly had financial interests, the Spanish idea of empire had more in common with how the Romans built empires. They wished to export the Spanish way of life, assimilate conquered people into their society, and enforce a Spanish social structure upon their subjects. And part of Spanish colonial life was that the colonials were strictly forbidden from owning firearms. Colonial subjects didn't own firearms or even property, but were mostly day laborers on plantations and mining complexes owned by corporate interests like the Basque Guipuzcoan Trading Company. When Spain came to the New World, it encountered large native kingdoms such as the Aztecs, so Spain brought an army and conquered them. But when the Spaniards encountered nomadic native nations in places like Chile, Texas, Venezuela, and New Mexico, they ran into trouble. You can conquer Tenochtitlan, but how do you conquer a constantly moving group of peoples not dependent on one particular spot of land? The Spaniards encountered the same nomadic warfare that bested the Romans, Russians, and Chinese before them. And since they banned their citizens from owning firearms, the only way a semblance of security could be established was by an expensive military presence. In short, it was only safe to live where the Spanish crown stationed troops. Elsewhere, well, not so much. Caracas was burned down by a native warband when it was ungarrisoned by the Spanish army.
I tell you what, war is terrible in general, eh? It's a freaking horrible thing, and all the stuff going on in the world at the moment is pretty scary, isn't it? But imagine in those days how brutal it was. Like, man, like I've said it before. I'm a big history lover. I love history. You probably noticed that because I've gone all quiet. But like, I sometimes I've got the Diaries of Julius Caesar on Audible, and I listen to that sometimes, and I'm just like, I try and put myself in that position. It was such a brutal way of life.
The Spaniards fought an almost 300-year-long war with the Apaches, Suma, and Mansu throughout northern Mexico, Texas, Nevada, and New Mexico. And unlike the wars we know from popular culture involving the Americans from much later, the Spaniards lost. Ranches were burnt to the ground, mines destroyed, and entire towns pillaged and burnt. The Spanish army was hopelessly lost in this vast region, perfect for ambushes and hit-and-run attacks. Spanish settlers were barred from owning any firearms or form militias to defend themselves. Whatever expedition pushed further north and to the east didn't fare any better. Spanish expeditions sent to explore and settle Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi just disappeared, and presumably because they were wiped out by the Cherokee. Then, in the 1600s, the Spaniards started executing Pueblo shamans for sorcery and witchcraft. The Pueblo, who were a settled people, rebelled and kicked the Spaniards out of Santa Fe and the Rio Grande Valley, restricting Spanish activity to southern Texas and California from then on. The Spanish colonial social order didn't allow for a successful settling of this area, as it was unequipped to conquer and assimilate nomadic natives or patrol the vast lands.
It seems like a bit of a mistake not letting your settlers have firearms to protect themselves when you know you're just going to get your ass handed to you, basically. Like you said, it's such a vast landscape, and when you've got that general knowledge of the advantage of knowing the landscape, you got no chance of beating them on their own turf.
The British had a completely different colonial policy. They explicitly encouraged their colonial subjects to own firearms. More than that, they handed out the land they had taken from the natives to settlers. And that land, aka property, is the reason why most of these settlers came in the first place. Europe was a mess of large landowners, serfdom, high grain taxes, and famines. Political rights, if existent at all, were also tied to how much property a person owned. Having a plot of land that was your own was a prospect irresistible to many, and irresistible to the British.
Still is,
was
isn't
what
it?
these settlers would do on that property. Buy slaves, grow cash crops, sell them to British trading companies, and thereby increase the wealth of the empire. And the British also allowed the means of defending that property. The settlers would be personally invested in their colonial property and thereby the colonial economy. The British would profit, not have to spend money on an expensive large standing army, could invest in a large navy to bully others, and the armed colonials would take care of the French, natives and Spaniards because they weren't just protecting the empire but their own property. The mistake the British made in the end was assuming that this colonial strategy wouldn't backfire. The colonial policy of handing out the land and permitting the ownership of guns for settlers is one the British practiced in every colony they settled, which is why all these countries...
Hey, there's South Africa! South African flag. Must be to do with the Boer War.
Practiced in every colony they settled, which is why all these countries have less constraining laws on private gun ownership to this day, except for those who in modern days introduced gun control laws. The United States, however, is different from the other colonies. Guns and the gun culture that developed became tied to property. The reason one owned a gun was to protect what was yours, or what you had taken from others. It became essential to the promise of the country to those who came to it, but also part of its darkest chapters. As much as you may read or hear of the American gun culture as something tied to a violent history, racism, hunting, frontier life or other, and as much as you might hear debates by legal scholars and politicians theorize the modern and past meanings of the Second Amendment, the truth of the matter is that this country's gun culture developed out of and goes hand in hand with the promise of owning your own property and being...
And the British gave everyone guns, so they started it.
permitted to defend what is yours. And that is a powerful drive that is hard to break. German and French gun culture revolved around having guns to kill each other. Polish gun culture revolves around being prepared for invasion. Same with Swiss gun culture. And as Europe increasingly became a more peaceful place, these gun cultures, and with them the ownership of guns, eroded or were drastically changed and reinvented. The United States have barely enacted any regulations to limit ownership of firearms, even when a sizable amount of the population used said firearms in an armed insurrection to keep slavery legal. If the Americans didn't restrict firearms ownership after they were used in an attempt to keep slavery legal, I doubt they will do so now after massacres and increased gun crime. There is, however, one thing that is steadily undermining the United States gun culture and might eventually be its undoing, something that is largely unnoticed in the modern gun debate. Ownership of private property is on the decline. And with the American gun culture being so deeply tied to property rights, what is most likely to in the end change the legal landscape on firearms in the United States is the change of American society itself from property owners into indebted, rent-paying day laborers.
What an interesting video. I'm going to watch that again because that's really interesting. Do you think that's going to change the fact that less people are owning property now? I know for a fact that that is still my biggest dream, is to own property. I really want a nice piece of land where I can, do a bit of hunting if I want to. I know that you need a big piece of land for that. Lunch is repeating on me. But you know what I mean? I think it's everyone's dream to own a bit of property. Do you think the fact that Americans are able to own less property is going to stop the guns? I don't have an opinion on the whole gun thing. I think every man, woman, I was going to say child, but every man or woman should have the right to choose if they want to arm themselves, to be honest with you. Because like he says, you've got to protect what's yours. And with all the crap that's going on at the moment, I feel pretty helpless sometimes. I'm like, what would I do? Literally, what would I do? Go at them with a knife? Don't go into a gunfight with a knife or whatever it is. I'd be completely screwed. So yeah, it is quite a food for thought. I think I'm gonna watch it again, and yeah, what an interesting video. Thank you very much. Was it Keith? I think it was Keith. Thank you very much for the suggestion, mate. I really do appreciate it. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. It's nearly the weekend, but I'll make up for not uploading. And I'll make sure I upload some videos on the weekend as well. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.